There were many human species on Earth. Most of them were stronger than you. They had thicker bones, denser muscles, bodies shaped by millions of years of brutal evolutionary pressure into something close to perfect for the world they lived in. They could endure cold that would kill you in hours. They could hunt prey that would destroy you in seconds. They had been tested by extinction events, by ice ages, by continent-scale resource collapses, and they had passed every single one. And yet, every one of them is gone. Not weakened, not reduced to scattered remnants on the margins. Gone. No descendants, no continuation of the line. Only bones buried under sediment, and the faint chemical echoes they left inside the genome of the one species that remained. Physically unimpressive, metabolically strange, socially unlike anything evolution had produced before. You. So the question is not what made humans special. That question is too small. The real question is this: why did every other human system, systems that worked, systems that had already survived for hundreds of thousands of years, systems that in many ways outperformed ours, why did they all eventually reach a point from which there was no return? And why, against every reasonable expectation, yours did not? Consider Homo neanderthalensis. They were not primitive. That framing is not just wrong, it actively prevents you from understanding what actually happened to them. Neanderthals were engineered by natural selection for one of the most hostile environments the planet has ever produced. Their bodies were compact and dense, built to conserve heat against glacial temperatures that would shut down an unprotected modern human in a matter of hours. Their skeletal remains show chronic patterns of muscle stress and healed injury consistent with close-range hunting of megafauna animals the size of small cars. They used pigment. They buried their dead. They made tools with deliberate and repeatable intention. In their world, Neanderthals were not struggling at the edges. They were dominant at the center, but their system carried a cost that was invisible during the good years. Their bodies demanded extraordinary energy to maintain. Researchers estimate their daily caloric requirements significantly exceeded those of Homo sapiens of comparable body mass. In a stable environment with predictable prey, that cost was manageable. It was simply the price of being built for cold and power. But climate in the late Pleistocene was not stable. It was volatile in ways that no organism could have anticipated. Prey populations fragmented, migration routes collapsed. Ecosystems that had been consistent for tens of thousands of years began shifting within decades. And when that happened, the energy cost that had always been there suddenly became something else entirely. It became a drain. The system could not stop. And once a system built on high caloric throughput loses its fuel supply, it does not weaken gradually. It does not find a lower equilibrium. One part fails, then the next, then the next. Not slowly, all at once. That is not decline, that is collapse. And there is no version of collapse that offers a second chance. Now consider Homo erectus, a species that had already accomplished something no other human lineage managed before it. They left Africa. They crossed landmasses, adapted to multiple climate zones, established populations across a range spanning millions of square miles, all before Homo sapiens existed as a species. They mastered fire. They produced tools with consistent and recognizable form. They survived for nearly 2 million years, which by any honest measure makes them one of the most durable organisms in the entire history of the genus Homo. And still, they are gone. What happened to Homo erectus is more instructive than what happened to the Neanderthals, because it is subtler, and subtlety is harder to see until it is too late. Their toolkits remained largely consistent across enormous stretches of time and geography. The Acheulean hand axe, one of their signature technologies, persisted for over 1 million years with only marginal modification. Their behavioral strategies were broad enough to sustain populations across diverse environments, but they were not dynamic. They did not accelerate, and for the vast majority of their existence, that was not a problem. Stability served them. Consistency was sufficient. But the environment does not honor consistency. It shifts. And when the rate of environmental change begins to exceed the rate at which a system can generate new responses, something quietly and irreversibly changes. The system that worked perfectly for 2 million years runs out of answers. One failure compounds the next. What looked like endurance turns out to have been inertia, and inertia, when the ground moves fast enough beneath it, becomes the very mechanism of collapse. Evolution does not reward what performs best under ideal conditions. It rewards what can keep performing when the conditions that made it possible are gone. On the island of Flores, in what is now Indonesia, evolution found a different solution entirely. A lineage of humans descended, evidence suggests, from Homo erectus, or a related ancestor, began to shrink. Over generations, they reduced their body size in response to the constraints of island life, limited resources, limited prey, limited space. The result was Homo floresiensis, a human being roughly 1 meter tall, with a brain significantly smaller than our own, but with behavior suggesting a cognitive complexity that does not map neatly onto raw brain volume. They made tools. They hunted. They persisted on Flores for hundreds of thousands of years. Their system was not a compromise. It was a precision instrument, calibrated almost perfectly to the specific demands of their specific environment. And for a long time, that calibration held. Here is the problem with precision. A system optimized for a narrow range of conditions has, by definition, no capacity outside that range. The efficiency that makes it work in normal times is the same property that makes it brittle when conditions shift. There is no excess, no reserve, no alternative configuration available when the primary one fails. When pressure arrived from outside, and the evidence suggests it did, in the form of new competitors and volcanic events and climate shifts, the system had nowhere to go. It could not expand. It could not reconfigure. It could not absorb the loss of even a single critical resource without the entire balance beginning to tip. One part of the system failed, then the next followed, then the next. Not immediately, but inevitably. And the distance between the first failure and the final silence was not long enough to matter. The Denisovans are the most enigmatic chapter in this story, because we know them less from what they left behind and more from what they left inside us. A finger bone, a few teeth, a partial jawbone recovered from a cave in Siberia, and the genetic signal they deposited in the DNA of populations alive today: Aboriginal Australians, Melanesians, Tibetans, and others carrying Denisovan ancestry at levels that confirm these were not marginal interactions. They were sustained contact between populations. The Denisovans were real, they were widespread, and they were adaptive in ways that still benefit living humans. A gene variant found in Tibetan populations today that allows survival at high altitude without the oxygen deprivation that debilitates most people. That gene is Denisovan in origin. That is not a footnote. That is a profound physiological gift carried forward across tens of thousands of years. And yet, the Denisovans disappeared. They adapted to extreme physical environments better than almost any other human lineage. But physical adaptation is only one dimension of survival. There is another dimension, and the evidence suggests they were weaker on it: information transfer. The capacity of a population to move knowledge between groups faster than danger can travel. When a Denisovan group discovered something critical, a new resource, a new threat, a new technique, how far did that knowledge travel? The genetic and archaeological record suggests their populations remained fragmented, dispersed across vast geographic ranges with limited connectivity, and fragmented populations cannot respond collectively. They cannot absorb the loss of one node without that loss remaining local, permanent, uncompensated. One group collapses and the others never learn why. One region empties and nothing fills it. The network cannot carry the load that the collapsed part no longer bears. And slowly, without a clear moment of ending, the system dissolves. Not because it was weak in any single place, because it was not connected enough to be strong everywhere it needed to be. Now stop and look at what all of these systems share, because there is a pattern here, And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every one of these lineages worked, not barely, not at the margins. They worked with a sophistication and durability that modern humans, for all our technology, have not yet matched across equivalent timescales. Neanderthals dominated the most brutal climate zone on the planet. Homo erectus held a lineage together across 2 million years and multiple continents. Homo floresiensis achieved metabolic efficiency that defies straightforward comparison. Denisovans conquered physiological environments that modern humans can barely survive without generational acclimatization. These were not failed experiments. They were fully realized solutions to fully real problems in environments that existed for a very long time. And that is precisely the point. They were solutions to worlds that stopped existing. This is the pattern. Not weakness, not inferiority, not some flaw embedded in their biology from the start. The pattern is this. Every system, no matter how well it performs, is calibrated to a specific range of conditions. When conditions stay within that range, the system is nearly unbeatable. But every system also has a threshold, a point at which the gap between what it was built to handle and what the world is demanding becomes too large to close in the time available. And when that threshold is crossed, something changes that cannot be changed back. One failure triggers the next triggers the one after it. The cascade begins, and the cascade does not stop once it starts, not because there were no individuals capable of adaptation, but because adaptation requires time and reproduction and transmission and network capacity, and all of those things require a margin that no longer exists once the threshold is behind you. They did not die because they were weak. They died because the world changed faster than they could. And that distinction is not a comfort. It is a warning. Early Homo sapiens did not dominate because they were the best at any individual thing. Measure them honestly against the competition and they lose on almost every axis. Neanderthals were stronger. Homo erectus had more accumulated time. Denisovans had physiological adaptations that Homo sapiens lacked entirely. Homo floresiensis had achieved an energetic efficiency that Homo sapiens never approached. So what was different? The system. Not its peak performance, but its architecture, the way it responded to pressure. Homo sapiens had a metabolism that could shift between fuel sources across different environments rather than being optimized for one. Their tools were not fixed forms inherited from ancestors and maintained unchanged. They were platforms, reconfigured continuously based on what each moment demanded. And their social structure was the most consequential difference of all. Early Homo sapiens did not live in closed groups that knew only what they had directly experienced. They lived in networks connected to other groups through trade, through language, through ceremony, through kinship systems that extended far beyond biological family. And through those networks, information moved, not slowly, not only between generations. In something approaching real time, across distances, no individual could travel alone. One group encountered a new predator and developed a response. That response did not die with the group. It traveled through the network and became available to people who had never seen that predator and might encounter it next season. One group found a new food source in an environment that looked barren. That knowledge spread outward and changed the calculations of groups dozens of miles away, and this changes the entire equation of survival. Because once information becomes the primary mechanism of adaptation, the speed at which a system can respond to pressure is no longer limited by biology. It is limited only by the reach and density of the network. When information moves reliably between groups, something unprecedented begins to happen. Survival is no longer bounded by what any individual or any single group has directly experienced. One group fails, and another learns from that failure without having to repeat it. One group succeeds, and that success is not a private advantage. It propagates outward, changing behavior across the entire network faster than any environmental pressure can travel. And the system begins to do something that no biological adaptation can do. It begins to update itself, not across generations, across seasons, across years. The accumulated knowledge of multiple groups, faced with multiple versions of the same problem across different environments, begins to converge into something more powerful than any single solution. Techniques are combined, strategies are refined, failures are noted and avoided, successes are amplified, and the result is a system that does not merely respond to pressure, it anticipates it. It generates new configurations before the old ones are fully destroyed. This is cultural evolution, and it operates on a timescale that natural selection cannot match by orders of magnitude. A population that can revise its behavior faster than the environment can punish it has crossed into a different category of existence. It is no longer playing the same game as every other species. It is playing a game where the rules can be rewritten mid-play. And once that becomes possible, the threshold that ended every other lineage moves, not infinitely, but far enough to matter. Far enough, in the end, to be the difference between continuation and extinction. There is one more layer, and it is the deepest one. It is not visible in stone tools or bone density or population genetics. It is cognitive, and it is the capability that sits beneath everything else described in this video. The ability to model what does not yet exist, to run internal simulations of futures that have not arrived, to prepare for a threat before it materializes, to anticipate a shortage before it begins, to make decisions not based on what is currently true, but on what might become true in the next season, the next year, the next decade. Every other human species adapted to what was real. Homo sapiens began adapting to what was possible. And that is not a minor upgrade. That is a category shift. Because it creates something that had never existed before in the history of life on this planet. A buffer between the arrival of pressure and the failure of the system. When you can imagine a future crisis, you begin moving toward a solution before the crisis forces you. You store resources before the shortage arrives. You develop alternative techniques before the primary one stops working. You build redundancy into systems that would otherwise be fragile. And when the pressure finally comes, and it always comes, you are not reacting from zero. You are continuing a process that was already in motion. A system that is already adjusting when pressure arrives does not collapse at the same threshold as a system that is standing still. The threshold moves, and in that movement is everything. So why did we survive? Not because we were the strongest, not because we were the most precisely adapted to any single environment, not because we had more time or more intelligence in any simple, measurable sense, or because we were somehow chosen by a process that had preferences. We survived because we were less fixed than everything else. Because when the world changed, our system could change with it faster than the environment could remove us. The others were not inferior. They were extraordinary. They solved real problems with real elegance. But their solutions were written for a world that eventually stopped existing. And when that world ended, they had no other version of themselves available. We survived because we could become something different just before the something we were stopped working. And here is what no one wants to say out loud. That capacity did not disappear when the Pleistocene ended. It did not get retired when civilization began. It is still inside you, running on the same architecture that outlasted every other human lineage. But the same rule that ended them still governs you. Every system functions until the pressure it faces exceeds its capacity to change. And when that gap opens, when what the world is demanding grows faster than what the system can generate, the cascade begins. One failure follows another, and the cascade does not negotiate. This is not ancient history. This is not a story about species you will never meet. The same threshold logic is operating right now, in organizations, in societies, in individual lives, in systems built on stability that have not yet been tested by the kind of volatility that ended something far more durable than any of them. The question that ended every other human lineage is still the only question that matters. When the pressure arrives, and it will, how quickly can you become something the old version of you was not? That is not a rhetorical question. That is the only question evolution has ever actually asked. The past is not behind you. It is still running inside you.